Our video will show how education may lead to a higher income per capita or a higher economic growth, or even both. To show the impacts of investment in education, we will compare Brazil with other countries that have been heavily investing in the past century. Having a good education does not only improve your own income, it helps increase the income of other people in your country. To see how that can happen, we need to understand two concepts: human capital and spillovers. Human capital is by definition the skills, knowledge, and experience possessed by an individual or population. More skills, knowledge, and experience makes you more productive. And if people are more productive, their individual production and the country's aggregate production are higher for any given level of workforce and physical capital stock. This results in an increased wage for the individual who accumulated more human capital through education, and also results in a higher per capita income level in the country. For example, in Brazil, having finished your college degree results on average in a wage that is more than double that of a worker who finished high school. This means that the personal return to education is very, very high. However, if you have a higher education, this also has a positive effect on the people around you. The so-called spillover effect of education is positive. This is an important argument in favor of the role of the government in improving the population's educational level. It does not merely improve people's individual wage, it improves the productivity and wages of those around them. The spillover works as follows. If you accumulate more knowledge, those around you, either at work or at home, will also benefit from your knowledge. At work, your increased productivity will partly result in others also become more productive. Of course, this effect is stronger if more and more people are receiving a good education, but it increases the base level of production. We can add human capital H into the Cobb-Douglas production function as an additional production factor. This function could now be described, for example, by the following equation. Given that the real wage workers receive is equal to the marginal product of labor, MPN, we can see that if individuals in society possess more human capital, the marginal product of labor will be higher, and hence the real wage earned by workers will be higher. Recall the definition of is the marginal product of labor, the extra output that can be produced when the labor increases by 1 unit, everything else, physical and human capital, held constant. If the production function is as follows, then marginal product of labor will be the function below, where A equals level of total factor productivity, K equals quantity of capital, N equals quantity of labor, and H equals a measure of the quantity of human capital. This is a downward sloping curve, meaning that for a given level of physical and human capital, the marginal productivity decreases with increases in the labor force. However, if human capital increases, the curve will shift to the right, resulting in a higher marginal product of labor for any level of employment. This term translates into a higher real wage level for any level of employment. This is the production curve. A society that has more proficient or skilled workers will be able to produce more with the same amount of physical capital and labor force, increasing therefore overall production. Given that everything produced will be sold and everything sold results in income, a society with more proficient or skilled workers has a higher per capita income. Now that we have shown that more human capital results in higher real wages, can we also show that it results in a higher economic growth rate of the economy? For that, we need to include changes in human capital into the solo growth accounting equation. If the production function is as follows, the growth equation becomes the equation down below. This equation says that the economy's real economic growth rate is the sum of the rate of change of total factor productivity plus a weighted average of the growth rates of the physical capital stock, of the human capital stock, and of the labor force. So if two countries have identical growth rates of total factor productivity, physical capital, and labor force, but human capital does not improve in country A while it improves in country B, the economic growth rate in country B will be higher than in country A. So if more human capital increases both the standard of living of individuals in a country because it increases the real wage of people and it improves the economic growth rate, which means that the population will achieve a higher standard of living at a faster pace over time, how can governments promote the formation of human capital? The answer is by investing in equation. We will look at the experience of two countries, Brazil and Singapore, and discuss the reasons why the first until today struggles with improving human capital formation, visible in the country's per capita income level and economic growth performance, while the other country thrives. Brazil's history shows many difficulties concerning investment in education. According to Reginski, the main reason for the delay comes from policy decisions based on political reasons. From the old republic until the military dictatorship, private interests were above public ones, which explains why investments on higher education was way bigger than on other levels. However, education entered the scope for the central government at the Vargas government, with its first education minister, Gustavo Capanema. Some changes were made mainly for the primary education, which includes children from 5 to 11 years old. The implementation by Capanema on that period remained almost about the same until the end of the dictatorship. The next big impact was the third law of education created in 1996, which claims 18% of federal budget and 25% of states and municipalities' budget to be directed to education. Comparing the overall expenditure in education of Brazil versus other Latin American countries that achieved a much better result in education, the expenditure was not very different. Therefore, we mustn't see the lagged educational situation in Brazil as lack of investment, but rather the allocation of expenditure of these funds. Secondary education is way behind the other sectors in Brazil. Also, the expenditure on higher education should decrease in order to level with the other sectors and diminish inequalities on the educational system. Now talking about Singapore. During World War II, many students dropped out of school, causing a huge backlog of pupils during the war. The state realized that the recent independent country needed to industrialize in order to become an economic potency. And the only way to do that was to invest in education. Thereafter, during 1950s and 1960s, Singapore started to invest heavily in education to lower unemployment and proceed with its industrialization program. The government also introduced the English as the language for national integration and utilitarian purpose. However, private and state schools still varied considerably during this period. By the early 1970s, Singapore reached a lower universal secondary school. This was only possible because the country constructed many secondary schools to support the demand from the children that started primary schools in the 1960s. There was an overall growth of secondary school students from 48,723 in 1959 to 161,371 in 1972 and 231 20% increase rate. Differently from other countries in Africa and the Americas, the state played a significant role to the development of schools in Singapore. Generally, every school in Singapore is public or state-supported. This was feasible because the government was well concerned about developing the society and willing to invest heavily in the sector. Singapore showed successful economically speaking when compared to its Asian neighbors. The next step to take was to find a way to sustain its growth and become an economic potency. The government started then other educational policies to transform a emerging manufacturing country to a quality and intelligence-based country.